My name is Cassidy Perry. I'm a college student, and a good one at that. I score well on exams, I'm on the dean list at my university, and I mostly manage my time well. I'm often the one whose peers turn to them when they need help understanding something in class. Like I said, I'm a good student. Now, what would you think about me if I told you that I took Adderall to help me do these things? Would I still be a good student to you? I did tell you a half-truth there. I don't take Adderall. But I do take Concerta, a controlled substance that stimulant properties are used to treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I was diagnosed with ADHD in high school after struggling with my workload revealed that I had been unknowingly masking a host of other symptoms for my entire life. I was very fortunate to have a doctor who believed me and was willing to prescribe me Concerta, but something initially stood in my way. My mother and her anti-medication stigma. Now, it may be hard to imagine a new to ADHD mom being concerned about an amphetamine being used to treat her daughter's condition. There's certainly no societal baggage surrounding the concept, at all, but she was. Luckily, after a conversation with my doctor, whose expertise she trusted, she allowed me to fill my first prescription. And that's happily ever after, right? Nope. That stigma is hard to shake. So let's talk about it. Since I want to go a bit deeper than the dictionary definition of the term stigma, we're going to have to start with a cursory description of the sociological theory of interactionism. Stay with me, I promise it's relevant. In 1931, a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago named George Herbert Mead died. Because he hadn't shared his theory while he was alive, a group of his students compiled their lecture notes and recollections of their conversations with Mead and published them under his name, calling it Mind, Self, and Society. In it, mind refers to one's ability to create and use symbols that represent aspects of the world around them. In Mead's eyes, language and thought are examples of this. Self refers to one's abilities to think about how they, the individual, are being perceived by others, and society is the setting where all of this takes place. The ideas present in mind, self, and society were clarified and given the name symbolic interactionism by Herbert Blumer, another student of Mead's. Blumer stated that society is the sum total of human interactions mediated by language, which is used to establish shared meaning of those who are co-present. This shared meaning is called joint action, and the first part is called symbolic interaction. Under this theory, people develop their sense of self through interaction with others. Stemming from the concept of symbolic interactionism, we arrive at our next stop on our way back to the point, labeling theory. Pioneered by sociologist Howard Becker in his 1963 work Outsiders, Becker offers that the premise of labeling theory is that once individuals have been labeled as deviants, they face new problems stemming from their reactions to themselves and others to the stereotypes of someone with the deviant label. More simply put, once people understand someone to be deviant, there are two problems that person must grapple with. One, the reflection of the negative perception of them in their own self-image, and two, everything that they do from that point forward will be interpreted by others, correctly or otherwise, as an extension of their deviant behavior. This is because deviant labels carry with them a certain amount of stigma. Now that we have some context, let's define the term stigma. As Irving Goffman puts it in Stigma and Social Identity, quote, "While the stranger is present before us, evidence can arise of his possessing an attribute that makes him different from others in the category of persons available for him to be, and of a less desirable kind. In the extreme, a person who is quite thoroughly bad or dangerous or weak. He is thus reduced in our minds from a whole and usual person to a tainted, discounted one. Such an attribute is stigma. A stigma can be a physical abnormality, a mental or character deficiency, or an atypical racial or national identity." So, what exactly does this have to do with ADHD and Concerta? Well, let's get into that too. It goes without saying that being mentally ill carries a lot of social stigma. The negative stereotypes about mental illnesses, while certainly lessening in severity as time progresses, are still very present and very difficult to navigate. There's a sort of double-sidedness to the public perception of disorders like anxiety, depression, ADHD, etc., where if you're unmedicated and trying to mitigate your symptoms on your own, people will notice that there is something off about your behavior. But if you do seek treatment, people will view you as weak-willed or lacking in discipline. And these are just the disorders that are relatively easier to treat. Disorders like borderline personality disorders, schizophrenia, and post-traumatic stress disorder are often much more visible and much more difficult to maintain. Even though mental illness is gaining more medical and social legitimacy, like anxiety and depression, ADHD still struggles to be viewed as a serious disability. In my experience, there are generally 3 avenues of dismissal that critics of ADHD employ. 1. Real symptoms of ADHD fly under the radar as character flaws. 2. The only people who have ADHD are young white boys and they grow out of it as they age. And 3. You just want access to drugs. In the years before I was diagnosed, I was often characterized as chatty, forgetful, lazy, and inattentive. Even as I grew older and learned to mask many of these behaviors to appear more socially acceptable, every report card I had contained some mention of one of these 4 traits. Many figures of authority in my life thought that I was a rebellious little child, and I admit I certainly had a streak of it, but really, I was just struggling with ADHD. Another common misperception of these that plagues ADHD is that it's a boy thing. Unfortunately, the medical field has based nearly all of its study of ADHD, like autism, on boys and men, allowing for misunderstandings of how symptoms manifest in women and non-binary people. This also causes frequent misdiagnoses for women and non-binary people who are instead labeled as anxious, depressed, or even as having borderline personality disorder. And lastly, the one we're focusing on here, is that people, particularly young adults, will find a doctor to diagnose them with ADHD with the sole intention of getting access to drugs like Adderall to use as a party drug or an academic performance enhancement. While I would never claim that this doesn't happen, or even that it's an infrequent phenomena, it's incredibly harmful to assume that everyone who is medicated for ADHD or even diagnosed with it is secretly plotting to abuse a controlled substance. This stigma in particular is so pervasive that it has permeated through the medical and even the governmental levels of our society. This labeling of those who are medicated for ADHD as deviants seeking a party drug has raised political concerns about amphetamine and methylphenidate, Adderall and Concerta, which in turn causes health organizations to lump these drugs in with all stimulants when keeping statistics for overdoses and deaths. This broad category includes drugs like meth and cocaine, which of course artificially inflates the true amount of overdoses caused by ADHD medication. To demonstrate how overblown the hysteria is regarding the lethality of these drugs, a 2021 study from the American Medical Association showed that from 2010 to 2017, only 0.45% of all drug-related deaths involved only medical stimulants. Despite this, ADHD medications are categorized as Schedule II drugs, making them incredibly difficult to obtain. All of the hoops one needs to jump through to ensure treatment aside, the judgment from medical professionals is embarrassing and dehumanizing. As a consumer of Concerta, I'm required by law to check in with my doctor every 3 months to see if I still really need my medication, undergo a drug test every 6 months, and I feel judgmental stares and tones of voice whenever the medical bureaucracy prevents me from getting my medication in time before I completely run out of it and I have to fight on phone calls and over countertops to ensure that my medical needs are met. And so, my experiences in fighting over proper treatment are categorized by deviance, labeling, and stigma. Recalling what we know about symbolic interactionism and labeling theory, it's important to understand that the stigmas surrounding ADHD and the medication that treats it reflect some on the patients involved. I myself have felt lazy, stupid, and like I'm asking too much when I'm seeking proper health care. With that explained, this is a public service announcement inviting you to be a little bit more empathetic to those you know with attention deficits and hyperactivity.